events that consist of masterclasses, workshops, presentations, panels like this one, talks, info sessions, and a new discussion series entitled Ask the Veterans. We will also have Q&As and we'll be live with the filmmakers. So please be sure to check out our website and social media pages to find all the events or films that you might be interested in. There's a lot happening this week. Today, I'd like to welcome you to the new media panel with filmmakers that have projects selected in this year's festival. All the panels are brought to you with the support of Shell Trinidad and Tobago Limited. Our moderator today is Melanie Archer. Melanie has worked in the fields of art, graphic design, and publishing since 2003. She's a former art director of the Trinidad and Tobago Film Festival and co-founder of its new media program of experimental film. Melanie is also partner editor at Robert and Christopher Publishers and a part-time lecturer at UWI St. Augustine. So without further ado, I will now hand you over to Melanie, who will introduce you to the rest of the panelists.
Thanks so much, Tennille. And thank you to the festival team and everybody who's joining us live. And of course, a very special thank you and welcome to everyone on the panel. So we have, in no particular order, actually, this is an alphabetical order, I'm sorry, I have to keep track somehow. So we have, maybe you guys can just wait because I'll just briefly say who you are and then come back and do more in detail introductions. So we have Ada M. Patterson, Alicia Diaz, Keoni Wright, Laura Iancu, Lisa Marie Harris, and Richard Mark Rawlins. So I'm really happy to be moderating this panel. I have a bit of a history with the film festival. So since its inception in 2006, the festival has shown experimental film works. And then we started getting more and more submissions of these experimental works, and they felt like they didn't fit into the traditional sit in a theater kind of setting of the rest of the films in the festival. So the decision was made by the then creative director of the festival, Emily Upsack, to break these works out into a new media section. So we teamed up with Holly Bino and Nadia Huggins from Arc Magazine, and we co-founded and co-curated the first new media showing, I believe it was 2011, and then we did for 4 years after that. So it was a time I really particularly enjoyed it, of extraordinary creativity. I got to know the work of a few people on this panel through it. And we saw the most amazing live performances and these great manifestations of people's ideas. A lot of these things I think wouldn't be possible in the times that we're currently living in. But one of the things that I've always loved about the film festival and in particular new media is that it brings people together and it connects artists with each other and it connects artists with the audience who enjoy their work, and the audience gets to ask some questions that you wouldn't otherwise be able to ask. So I'm particularly grateful that that aspect of connection remains, even though we're not able to be physically in the same space. So we are going to jump into it. Panelists, I encourage you to think about questions that you may want to ask each other. And of course, to the audience listening, please send your questions and we'll get into it. So I'm going to introduce everyone in a little bit more detail, one by one, and ask in general, how your work, how the creation of your work in this festival, the work that is in this festival came to be, and also how is this work situated in the rest of your practice. So now in no particular order, let's start with Alicia, because I think there are thunderstorms and things happening, and I know that you haven't really exited as well. So originally from Puerto Rico, Alicia is the co-director of Agua Dulce Dance Theater. I'm sorry for any mispronunciations. As a Puerto Rican contemporary dance artist in the diaspora, her choreographic work speaks to issues of migration, colonialism, and the legacy of slavery. Her artistic research is rooted in the premise that the body is a site of knowledge and on questions of memory and identity. So Alicia's work, Alicia, will you give the correct pronunciation of your work in this festival?
Yes, it's a long title. Mm-hmm. It's called Entre Puerto Rico y Richmond, Women in Resistance Shall Not Be Moved. So Entre Puerto Rico and Richmond.
Right.
Should I take it from there?
Well, I will say I'm going to read like a little bit of the synopsis that was presented. So it's a dance film that combines biography, poetry, and ritual with the energy of live performance to bridge stories of resistance and liberation between Puerto Rico and Richmond, Virginia, and the USA. The film honors Black women tobacco workers in Richmond and Puerto Rican tobacco factory readers and activists, Dominga de la Cruz Becerril, pretty sure I got that wrong, and Luisa Capetillo. So I think now you can take it away and just tell us a little bit about how this piece came to be. I was absolutely fascinated by the story because I never heard anything about factory readers. So if you can just tell us a bit about the work.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. So as you said, I am Puerto Rican living in the diaspora. Right now in Richmond, Virginia, which is the capital, the former capital of the Confederacy in the United States. So it's really heavy history that has legacies that we're living today very strongly in the city, as we are, of course, in the country and the world, as the U.S. continues to be an imperial force. So as a Puerto Rican, I was trying to figure out how does my presence here make sense, right, in the diaspora? Why am I here right now? And I had the opportunity I was commissioned to do a film by the Institute for Contemporary Art at VCU, one of the universities here, with the notions of commonwealth and common debt. And so the idea was to think about those terms today, right? And to think about them both historically and their connections to colonialism, as well as ways in which we can tap on those notions of commonwealth to move forward, right? To a more just and equitable society. So as an artist here, I knew that I wanted to bring Puerto Rico to the forefront. Puerto Rico was a colony of the United States since 1898 and until today, right now. So I knew I wanted to elevate Puerto Rico and the Caribbean, and how to do so in the context of Richmond, Virginia. And so through research, I found this incredible connection between the two through the tobacco industry. And the American tobacco industry was founded here in Virginia and other areas in the South. And it was also the American Tobacco Company that entered through colonial power with the United States after the Spanish-American War in 1898 to Puerto Rico. And so suddenly I was here in this really charged intersection of histories that I had not been aware of before. And that led me in this very nonlinear ways to think about resistance and liberation through stories, reclaiming stories of women in particular and women activists. So come in the stories of Dominga de la Cruz Becerril, who was a nationalist leader in the 1930s in the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party, and Luisa Capetillo, who was, before her, a feminist writer, labor organizer, prolific feminist writer. And both of them were tobacco readers. Readers in tobacco factories. This was a tradition that was done in the Caribbean, throughout the Caribbean and parts of the United States. And so these were people and women that read to workers, to tobacco workers, as they were working with their hands, and they read newspapers and political literature, and really participated very strongly in the consciousness that led to really fantastic labor organizing protests that transformed the working class during those times. These are figures that are separated through history. They don't coexist in time necessarily. So part of this work was also about historical imagination, and how could I bring an Afro-Puerto Rican woman and a white Puerto Rican woman in conversation with Black women who worked in tobacco factories in Richmond, Virginia, such a strong center of tobacco history in this country. So that's a lot. That's a lot to say, but that was my entry point of wanting to find these intersections And then that also intersected with the pandemic. We filmed and created during the pandemic in the height of the anti-racist protests that were taking place in the summer of 2020. And so this historical imagination was really activated by the very urgent movements that were taking place today as we were filming under really quite unusual and difficult circumstances. And in Richmond, Virginia, you may be familiar that there were many Confederate statues of white supremacy that have come down now, really all of them, just this summer. So this was a symbolic also place to be during this filming.
Thank you. Wow. Yeah. So I think I'm going to go next to Lisa Marie Harris. Lisa Marie is an artist from Trinidad and Tobago, living and working in London, UK. A graduate of Central St. Martin's with a distinction, an MA distinction in contemporary photography, practices and philosophies. Lisa Marie was selected as the 2021-22 recipient of the Helen Scott Lidgett, is that right, award, and the 2021 winner of the Jane Carroll Clark Memorial Award. Her hybrid process investigates the idea of body as an object and considers the absence of bodies alongside of breaking apart and putting together a form. I think that's particularly fascinating. So Lisa Marie's work that is in the New Media Showcase is called Flight Path, and it is a video narrative made in the isolated months of the first London lockdown. And it's interrogating the notion of reaching, of attainment and accomplishment in regards to both the physical act of movement and attempting to advance oneself. So Lisa Marie, there's this line that happens a couple of times in your work, which is, it'll be fine once you've reached. And I really loved that from a both physical and sort of status standpoint. So if you can tell us a little bit about how you came to make that piece. And it's also interesting that it's kind of fascinating to find how many of these works happened during the pandemic now, because I'm noting that this was in the first lockdown. So can you tell us a bit more about that work?
Yeah. I mean, over here in London, pandemic was sort of going on for a long time. It was the lockdown in particular seemed to have never ended until just the other day. But for us here making work, for myself in particular, it being here, not being British, being Trinidadian, and being locked down in London during the winter, during the summer, obviously you start to think of home. You start to think of your mobility and the lack of mobility, which I think everybody was dealing with essentially during that time. But I had this work that I'd been playing with for quite some time, since 2018, 2019, which was this flight sale. And there was this question of getting out of an institutional space and wanting to sort of interrogate how would one show a work in a more accessible way that is not necessarily within the white cube or within traditional institution. And then that stopped being a theoretical thing and became a real life issue once the pandemic happened. Long story short, I have a colleague, Leanne Wiggins, who's Dutch, and her work essentially was, she was trying to deal a lot with movement. And it was becoming difficult to consider movement at a time when one can't leave one's specific city. And my work was also dealing with movement, but more in this case of elevated movement and sustaining this motion. We came together and this object that I had developed 2018, 2019 became the flight sails that we installed together in November 2020 in Alexandra Palace here in London. And that was for an exhibition called Homeward Bound. So that was actually a performance piece, a performance installation, like a kinetic art installation. Very different interaction with a work from what you see in the piece that I made, which I filmed during this exhibition. And it wasn't supposed to look the way it did at all. I had something else completely in mind. But when I was filming, I had all the pieces, all the edits rather, brought it home here, and I editing this thing on current goes, electricity, sorry. The power gets cut.
Current goes is fine.
And
That's a very true thing. Oh, current.
Yeah. So I know, right? So I have 2 young kids, and I am working, and they're downstairs, and the current gone, and they start to scream. And I'm like, oh gosh, it's just current. It's just the current gone. But in saying that, I got really angry, because I thought, I am editing this blasted thing, and current goes, I lose all my edits, and I'm in London. This is supposed to be the advanced part. No, this is backwards people think. These things
current
only
goes in the Caribbean. Current doesn't go in
London, right?
Yeah.
No. And it went for a very long time. It didn't come back until the next evening, and I was really pissed, and I had to start over this editing of this video. So I took that and I made Flight Path. When I started re-editing, what I could have saved from those first clips, I realized there was something to tease apart in this notion of reaching, of getting somewhere, and what does that getting look like? What does it sound like? Does it sound like a specific lexicon? Does it have a specific ideation, a visual context? And the action of having this sail that is just there, it doesn't go anywhere. It's just stagnant. That's stasis. It's always moving, but it gets nowhere. I love that, and it sort of came together in looking at the footage again, and I don't know, in a sort of Derridian way almost. It started to come together where I asked, well, what is this being that we have when we reach? Where does that take us? And I guess thank God for the electricity going, because it went in a very different direction. But a lot of my work comes together based on teasing apart these dichotomies between personal histories and then larger narratives. And Flight Path is it's situated very nicely within my life.
I guess, interestingly, both you and Alicia are dealing with ideas about movements in very different ways, and ideas about history and belonging in different ways. But I kind of think one of the things that I always wonder is about the power of the work. And do you feel as though, because Alicia, I can imagine your piece, because it's just so beautiful and there's so much movement in it. I would love to see that as a live performance. So I'm wondering if there's anything that you ever feel is compromised from the movement of, because your work, Alicia, was it conceived as a live performance that was documented and edited after, or was it conceived as a video? And the same for you, Lisa Marie, was it? Because it seems like there's a little bit of distance between the original idea and then what came together. And then how do you feel about that? Like, do you feel like there's a compromise there, or do you just feel like they're different mediums?
Do you want to go, Alicia?
I can start. Yeah, that's such an interesting question. In this case, I was already commissioned to do a film, because this was originally going to be an exhibit that would travel, and I wouldn't be able to travel with them as a performer. So before the pandemic, they had already asked for that. So that was interesting. And really the reason why it didn't get canceled, right? Because all live performances were getting canceled. Right. I was able to continue with this project. But the piece was created in the last standing warehouse of the American Tobacco Company here in Richmond, where we got permission to film as they were bringing down, like literally destroying all of that space. So we were in the midst of ruins as ruins were taking place in this one little warehouse that was waiting for us to finish. And so all of the work came from being in that space, right? And it was important for me to bring that performance element and that live element into the space, not only for content, but also we were entering a Black space. We were entering an ancestral space of great, heaviness. You could feel all the tobacco toxicity of when tobacco ceases to be medicinal and becomes a part of the capitalist system, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there was ritual involved in it, and in many different ways throughout the film, altars of resistance throughout the film. The movement has ritualistic sort of essence in its co-creation, and the music was really important to resonate in that space as we paid homage to these women and their strategies for liberation.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's interesting. For me, I sort of always work in this sense of a multiplicity. So it's not so much that the work, there was some distance between the original exhibit and the film that we're seeing, or that's part of the film festival this year, but it's more that if I'm working within a multiplicity, there are many different ways that one work could exist. And it started off in this one physical, sort of tangible space, and it made sense in that way. But a lot of my research deals with Meridian thought and with the body, with a body as a thing, and talks about its thinghood. What do we exist? How do we exist in a body if we think of a body as an object as opposed to our vessel? So in separating things, I get to play a lot with many different layers of representation and to sort of pick apart and reconstitute how my work itself is presented. So for instance, with the sails, they appeared as a live work, as a performance work in Alexandra Palace. But then it also made sense to explore this narrative in visual format. And once I showed it very briefly online, and Louis Vasquez La Roche, Venezuelan artist who's also based in Trinidad, saw it, and he reached out to me, and he was like, "Oh gosh, this is so evocative. Do you think the same way it's flying in London, do you think it would work if we flew it in Trinidad?" And that wasn't the original thought at all. But again, within a multiplicity, you can do that. You can have this sort of a rhizomatic experience. Right. And I said, we can make it work. We can make it work. Yeah. And so we talked about it and realized there were indeed a space for connectivity, for exploring how this body without form that the flight sails represent could indeed take flight, have a space, and be used within a Trinidadian space in a way that I would have never imagined. And so we encased this sail, we made it inanimate once more, put it in a casket, and we sent it off to Louis in Cuba. And then he reanimated it in his own way, and it became something else. Okay. So now it's become a sort of traveling exhibit called Destination Log. And I like that way of working. So most times when I make a work, it never has one life.
Okay.
It has the life that it's meant to, and whether that means whether that means I take it onto a digital platform, or I make it into a book project, or it's a piece of writing, that one idea gets teased apart until it's broken down to its most finite substance.
Okay, great. All right, so moving on, and I think I want to go next to Ada, and we're going to talk about the body in a very different and sort of more specific way. So Ada is a visual artist and writer based between Barbados, London, and Rotterdam. They are the 2020 NLS Kingston Curatorial and Art Writing Fellow and have exhibited in London at the Barbados Museum, at 10th Rotterdam. It's a long list. Also, they're a writer. So their work in the festival is an affirmation, which shares the experience, it says, and I'm interested in that because it's a sort of removal of receiving gender-affirming care by way of hormone replacement therapy. In a world that can be hostile to trans bodies, life can feel like a survival below the surface, offering a slower, softer, and subtler way of feeling closer to the vision of oneself. The experience of this care is likened to the ability of breathing underwater, where bodies shift and bend in the refraction of light and liquid. So, Ada, I want to talk about this piece and how you came to make it. And also because I also think of you, when I think of you, I'm like, that is a video artist. I associate you very much with this medium, but I would still love to talk about this piece and how it fits into the rest of your practice.
Yeah, thank you, Melanie. Yeah, so when I was making this work, I was back home in Barbados doing the NLS Kingston Curatorial and Art Writing Fellowship. I was mostly doing writing work around and research and having conversations with a few different like queer and trans practitioners. So artists, writers, activists, and performers. And the sort of questions that I was like working through were like, how does queer and trans life relate to visibility in the Caribbean or in Barbados specifically, especially when considering discretion is not only a survival tactic, but also a very particular quality of the kinds of queer life being lived in the Caribbean. So how do we relate to visibility, to being seen, to being caught above the surface in a certain eye, in a certain gaze? At times, there are questions that we have to take into consideration around like presentation and how we appear in public space, which can feel very like breathless, hostile, and scarce kinds of experiences where we're not allowed a lot of space to actually, just be. And I wanted to take that seriously while also considering that it's not only that is visible and that is lived, that it is not only a sense of scarcity being lived, but also there is a lot of abundance which goes by unnoticed and unseen and undetected. And for me, it was important to phrase this kind of life as life lived below the surface. And so while I was having these conversations and doing writing around these kinds of thoughts and questions, I was also filming, not for really any particular reason. I was doing a lot of underwater filming, I guess for me to test this metaphor, what does it look like to live below the surface, to try and breathe underwater. So I was doing a lot of underwater filming. I was doing filming of some of the tide pools and coral reefs on the East Coast. And just also trying to take note of things that felt notable, but could easily go by unnoticed. Just things I don't know, particular shimmers on the water, my own shadow, while swimming, the things that I do every day. And part of that process is, taking hormones every day. And just taking account of those things and trying to stay with the abundance of all these little things that come together, to really stay with that and feel all of it, and to know that there is space to breathe in that. Also, for further context, I just want to say, around the time that I made this this film because of COVID, putting stress on like supply chains and things like that. There was actually a drought of a lot of medication in Barbados, which I don't know if it's still going on. It was going on for quite a while. And so part of that, part of the consequences of that drought was that there was a particular drought of hormones on the island, which affected me, affected other trans people who I know and who I don't know. And so, yeah, I think like the kinds of thoughts I was having around this time were just very like, I want more than this for us. I want the abundance for us. I want all the breath that is available underwater. And so, yeah, this was kind of the spirit that I was making this work in.
Thank you, Ada. I also love, there's a line that says this idea that talks about walking with a little more rhythm. And I thought that was a particularly beautiful line because I feel like that's when you're coming into yourself and you can just, walk a little bit more freely. Okay, we have 35 minutes, heads up. So on next to, let's go to spoken space, yeah. Laura. Laura Iancu is a visual artist working primarily in hybrid video forms and immersive 3D animation and gaming. She's currently teaching film production classes at Virginia Tech in the USA. So Laura's piece in the new media is called Current State True. And the synopsis is some memories are password protected. Others always run without asking. Phantom sound bites loop around the kitchen table inside a house in space. Laura, I think you have one of the most kind of highly conceptual sort of, when I think experimental film, I always talk about this pet peeve I have about experimental film where people feel as though they can take like a bunch of funny angles and cut things together and put some filters and all of a sudden, there's an experimental film. But I think what you've done with this work where you're taking people on a journey that is scripted, it's kind of like you're almost seeing. Well, I will let you talk more about the work because I don't want to say what it feels like too much to me. But can you tell us a bit more about the work?
Sure. And I would also love to hear more about what people experience with it because it's sometimes I worked on it by myself. So it was COVID, and I thought, what can I do? I can stay home, and I made a video game. Right. And my brother coded the game, but I did all the visuals and I built it up. And then, I thought, not a lot of people probably play video games or it's on my website. Nobody goes there. It's not on Steam or anything. It's more like a platform than a legitimate video game, but it is immersive and you can walk around. So I made this film as a sort of like cluster of intensity, taking some of the screen recordings from the game. And then some pictures that I took like 20 years ago, basically the first pictures I ever took as an artist. And I kind of wanted to capture some essence of what that journey was in the film. So it has like celluloid still photography and also screen grabs of this like going through a world that feels, to me, I wanted it to feel kind of like a haunted sort of memory, like if someone died and that's like whatever's left behind in this like empty sort of chaos, and it could be lots of things, or like a glitching archive or something like that. Yeah. And the coding was kind of poetic too, so that's why you have some lines of codes from here to here, and the title is like a line of the code my brother wrote. To me, is alien, but it was just kind of like, it feels, it kind of came together, and it felt like an intimate gift sort of, which is what art I think is sometimes. It's kind of like, I'm not going to take your hand and we don't need to know each other. Here it is. Here's some part of me, very straight and direct. So I hope it's just a puzzle people like to play.
Yeah, I was completely fascinated by it, and I did get this kind of sense of some sort of other world haunted, strange landscape as we're moving through. And I really think this is a good time to encourage everybody who's listening to please view the films. You can see them online, and also, well, I think I'll leave it to the festival to do the festival wrap up, but really do have a look at the films. They're really amazing works. Laura, we're gonna come back to you, but I'm just gonna introduce Keoni and Richard separately. So Richard Mark Rawlins is a graduate of the Royal College of Arts Print Program. His research takes a transnational approach to the pop cultural poetics and politics of life in the Caribbean, the contested and resultant histories and realities of colonialism and Black identity and diaspora politics. It's a very long list of places Richard's work has been shown. Look up his bio so we don't take up too much time. His piece in the New Media Showcase is Reconquête de Tintin. And he writes that is embodied absurdity. Absurdity in the context of art exploration has a close pumpkin vine, cousins, humor, ritual, repetition, play, endurance, failure, irony, sarcasm, and of course, rebellion and resistance. So Richard's like, there's no way to get around giving away what the piece is about without just telling you what it's about. So in it, Richard is in a very absurd way that doesn't seem like it should be as engaging as it is for 7 whole minutes, fussing with this tuft of hair. He's fussing with the tuft of hair, he's brushing it, he's applying products, all sorts of things are happening. So Richard, I wanted to talk about this piece and how and why it came about, and also in particular with your work. I think you're dealing with some really serious issues that we can all relate to and that many people have touched on in their practice, but also there's always, at least I feel, there's the sense of humor is really strong in your work. So I'd like you to talk about that as well, just about this particular piece and humor.
Well, speaking about the humor, I mean, Melanie, you know me and you know me well. I'm quite sarcastic. And I look at the things that seem to be absurd in life, and it's not so much a case of lampooning it, but I look at the things that when you think of the black body and you think about the black body in space, right? What has been happening now with my foray into performance is I look at how the black body occupies space, and I also reflect on the things that the black body seems to be having to face daily, regularly, on a month, by year, and it seems as though history always repeats itself. In the run up to making Reclaiming Tintin, which is what it is in English, I had been invited to show at an exhibition called Congo Overprint in Belgium, where they were examining the legacy of Belgium to the Congo and the things that went with that. And in my own research, I was dealing with Hergé and Tintin. And the interesting thing about that is that we grew up in the Caribbean on a lot of American media, and we grew up in the Caribbean on a lot of European media as well. So the comics that I first experienced before I actually experienced American comics were European comics, things like Tintin and Asterix and Lucky Luke and stuff like that. So I've been a fan of it for ages. So I started a deep dive into Hergé and Tintin, and I created a piece at RCA called Tintin Meets Kendrick Lamar, where I juxtapose Tintin being carried by supposed savages in the Congo as against 4 policemen carrying Kendrick Lamar and his friends in a vehicle, right? And my work spins in different directions, and it invites me to create new things with it. And once I had done that, I started looking at pulling the notion of making that reclamation happen. And I started playing with my own tuft of hair, which is like a little Tintin-like coif. And also looking at how long I could do this before I reach a failure point. Because for me, the whole performance thing was new. And I think what I was testing was the limits of my body and what I could do and how long I could keep doing it. And also the futility of starting in one place, trying to get to a totally different place and ending up at the exact same place that I started, which is a metaphor, as you know, for quite a few things that people who have done anti-racist work have faced, people who have looked at colonialism have faced, or just being in the Caribbean and being a native of the Caribbean could attest to. Yeah.
Thank you. And Keoni. Keoni Wright is a Suriname-based experimental filmmaker, documentarian, visual artist, and television producer. Born in Boston, Massachusetts, to an Irish mother and a Filipino African-American father from Hawaii, Keoni graduated from Boston's Emmanuel College before serving 10 years in the United States Navy. Your piece, Suriname Veteran, the synopsis reads, although Suriname's civil war was a modern conflict, it has largely evaded the grasp of filmmakers and storytellers worldwide. And of the Civil War stories that permeate South America's smallest country, few focus on the everyday maroon foot soldiers who fought tooth and nail against Suriname's Marxist regime. Suriname Veteran captures the transformation that occurred when Romeo donned his red beret and became a corporal once again. So, Keoni, how did you come to make this story, and how do you know Romeo? And why are you based in Suriname? There's so many questions.
It's absolutely wonderful here. Yeah.
Yes, but how did you come to be in Suriname, and how did you come to be connected to the story?
I started coming to Suriname in 2017. In 2018, I made my first film here, which was subsequently my first film called Released, which, as I mentioned before, was in the Trinidad and Tobago Film Festival, which was a beautiful honor. And the springboard that allowed and the confidence that allowed me to have moving forward was really unbelievable. And Suriname really kind of became this cradle for my creativity. You know, I've lived in New York, I've lived in Boston, I've lived in Hawaii, involved in the arts in all those places. But there is something about being here. And I think it has to do with being an outsider and also being humble enough to, you know, meet people and see the magic within them. And when we talk about my work in Suriname, it is of the utmost importance to me that people are allowed to tell their stories. There is no outside narrator. There is no, you know, of course we have to have an outline and we have to have sort of a direction we're heading in, and that's my role. But I'm not out to make propaganda films. I'm out to let people tell their stories with their own voices. So when you watch Suriname Veteran, what you're actually watching is me being so frustrated with editing a larger documentary, which is also being shown in the film festival this year, called Posse for Romeo. It'll be debuting on Thursday. I hope everyone has an opportunity to watch. I was so frustrated that I was like, I need some kind of closure. And I don't know if as artists you ever go through that. And I said, you know what? I want to make a short montage film using the footage that we're not going to be able to include in the documentary. And I think what's interesting about that is that, you know, as an independent filmmaker, self-funded and whatnot, it really breaks my heart every time I have to delete something. So it was important to me to make this short film, but also make it in the vein of some of the 80s corny action films that I had seen. Many people don't realize that in the 80s, when we talk about the A-Team, Magnum PI, many of these other shows, we're talking about in the American context, people trying to reframe the way that people looked at Vietnam veterans. And I've only come to learn that recently. And so my goal with making Suriname Veteran was to reframe the maroon foot soldier from the Suriname Civil War, which was from 1986 until 1992. So the montage that I made is not really a trailer for A Posse for Romeo, but I certainly hope it leads people to the film so they get the wider story. But Romeo Kofi Maga was a maroon man, a Quinty man who lives deep in the jungle here. I met him in 2018, and at the offset, you look at him and he's a boatman, a fisherman, a hunter. This is how he identifies himself. And then when you sit down and talk to him, he has all these crazy stories from 6 years of fighting in the Civil War against a Marxist regime that was trying to take over his land, that was trying to basically convert everyone to a certain kind of ideology. And what you learn is that the Maroon people, 100%, when we look at the baseline, were fighting for their own freedom and to maintain their way of life. And to put that in a deeper context, they've been doing that since they ran away from plantations in the 1600s, 1800s. And I just said, I need to make this film. My intent was to come back in 2020 to make it, but there was a little thing called the pandemic. So I came back in 2021, and my filmmaking colleague and I, we ventured deep into the jungle to his village, and we made this beautiful documentary. And it's near and dear to my heart because my ancestors were Buffalo Soldiers from the abolition of slavery in the United States. They were some of the first freed slaves to sign up for the army, and that tradition has gone on actually from my great-great-grandfather, my great-grandfather, my grandfather, skipped a generation with my dad, and then I also served as well. So it was important to me to not look at the bigger scope of this Civil War, but to take one foot soldier's story, not to worry about regional stability and all these big names that you might see when you look at media concerning Suriname Civil War, but to bring it down to one man and the sacrifices that he made. And we also talk about the atrocities that were committed by the Suriname military during that time against Maroons. And then he just has a harrowing story to tell. But when you look at the experimental piece, I wanted to play with popular culture. And so it's done in the vein of one of those cheesy action montages from the 80s. But we're not looking at Mr. T, and we're not looking at Magnum PI. We're looking at Romeo Kofi Maga, a 51-year-old former jungle commando who served here. And it was also very important to me that I wasn't going to hire actors to recreate, that he was going to put that red beret on again, and that he was going to relive some of those moments in his life during those battles. And he just, for a guy that doesn't even have a camera on his cell phone, he has a little Nokia brick phone. He is an amazing actor, and I hope that kind of comes through. I hope that kind of comes through in the short montage piece, and I certainly hope that you all find time to watch A Posse for Romeo on Thursday. And I look forward to viewing all of your works as well.
I was really fascinated by how he just transformed once that beret was on. He just became.
It was 1986 again.
Yeah. It's sort of amazing to look at.
Thank you.
Yeah. So do you have any questions for each other? Does anybody have questions based on? I know you haven't really seen the works, but just from hearing each other talk about them. Anything, or do we have any questions, Soraya, from anybody online? Maybe watching? Okay. None yet? Okay, hold on, I have some. Okay, I guess one of the things that I want to ask about is a sense of, do you feel that there's a sense of responsibility to make a work that addresses, because it's interesting, because one of my fill the time questions was, how has your practice been affected by COVID? But I think everybody has actually given almost everybody has given some sort of response as to how, they were impacted, or how while making the work things changed, or challenges that they faced while making the work in the spaces that they were, etc. So that question is out the window, but I'm also wondering, do you feel that there's a responsibility, or do you feel a sense of responsibility to make works that address larger or current issues? So I know, Alicia, you spoke a little bit about, it was Black Lives Matter. It was that summer when you were making this work. But on the other hand, Laura, for instance, I don't know if you feel like you're just like, no, I'm just going to make, something that is a very personal thing. Or Ada, do you feel as though, is there that sense of responsibility of connecting with global issues, Black lives, climate, anything like that?
I feel in my own practice, I make work, full stop. And I have a responsibility to make work. If I am taking the time to shoot a film, to do work on canvas, to do sculpture, then my responsibility and focus is on completely dedicating myself to figuring out why this is more important right now than attending to something else. And inherent in that is a need to be honest to your own concerns. And I feel like if I work from that place of honesty within my own concern, then perhaps I have a better chance of relating to someone. I find that to me works better in my practice as opposed to saying I'm going to address X, Y, Z. You know, and I think every artist works from their own place of being. You work from your own authenticity, and in so doing, you do get to the larger question. Of course, sometimes it's sort of unavoidable. Something happens and you feel a specific need to address something. This larger global issue or whatnot. Like a lot of my work, I use a lot of reclaimed objects in my work, and I use a lot of biological material. Like I just spent 2 months in Grand Cayman, literally cutting down calabash and cleaning like dozens of calabash that I am using in my practice. You know, inherent in that is sort of sensitivity with the land, with ecology, with sustainability, but those aren't necessarily concerns in my practice. They're concerns in how I make and in the materiality of my practice. But in being honest and true to being a Caribbean maker, this specific kind of Caribbean maker that I am, those concerns will come along with me. That's my general approach.
Yeah.
I have to I have to agree with what Lisa said. I think that you come to your work from a place of truth, and some people choose to carry the burdens of certain things and some people don't, and that's okay. But I think if you come into your work from specific places that are authentic, then you can't help but live in the global picture or the larger picture. In a sense, you're already plugged into it. And I think it's in your being and it'll be in your work. So even if the work is about something, the work still could be read at different levels by different people because you're actually plugged in immediately to what's going on at the time. And these little things, I think, are the beautiful things that give the expression of the work a wider range, in that you can't dictate basically as an artist what this work means alone in its entirety, because just like you talk about sales, right? It had a different life when it moved, when Louis picked it up, so I may look at it, I may even think that it's actually an analogy for migration as well, just this object moving, right? And I think this is the beauty of, as they say, coming to things from your own truth and being plugged in an authentic way, in that you actually end up being part of a larger discussion anyway, whether you're going there or not.
Yeah. Anybody else wants to?
I was going to say that all of this really resonates with me, and it feels like in all of the work, not even having seen it, all the different entry points do get to these larger issues, right? Through what you're all talking about right now. That's really strong there. And I wanted to offer that for this work in particular, on the one hand, yes, I wanted to bring visibility to Puerto Rico as a colony of the United States. And I felt like I had this is an opportunity for visibility, which I was, Ada, when you were talking, I was thinking about that, your whole discussion of visibility. But also what I wanted to offer is the way of working, right? As you were saying, Lisa, right? And so for us, I worked with Luis Vázquez Larroche also. He was part of the team of creators for the work, and a team of co-creators. And this idea of co-creating, right? Of making work in ways that are asking questions about equity, with frameworks that are anti-racist frameworks, right? How does our work in the creative process itself move us towards Black liberation was one of the questions that was really important in the creation of, right? And then there's a product. But that way of working with each other seemed really central to the work that we were doing. So again, these different layers in which we're working, which we were referring to before, I think are really important.
Anybody else?
Yeah. I guess I think about this all the time too. You know, it's like a really, really important question, and it's like, well, what right do I have in 2021 to like engage with like flights of fancy and like poetic, you know, whimsy things and stuff like that? When you know, there's such need, I think, for art to be more connected to like real life issues. But I think, you know, like when it comes to social issues, I think like particularly my mix of identities is kind of making me take a step back and play like not center stage and like work on my own shit. So it doesn't like, I don't become harmful, you know, in engaging in something that I have no place or business in speaking about. So, but, you know, I try to find something that I can do. So my last work, for instance, I do work on things about ecology, and soil and farming and sustainable agriculture, because that's something I do think I can speak of. While in my life, I try to, you know, implement or live, you know, through anti-racist practices, for instance, as much as I can, in education and just being in the world. But also like from time to time, I just need to make like that one weird thing, you know?
Yeah.
That's just, maybe it is escapism, but there might be a place for that, hopefully.
I think there is. I think we need it. I mean, the world is what the world is. You know, it's right there. If you need to deal with all of those issues, you can just go deal with them. But there's escape. There's a place for escape, and I think that for a lot of people, art offers a different lens through which to see something that feels a bit more personal. Laura, you mentioned a mix of backgrounds. What is your mix of backgrounds, as you brought it up?
Oh, just as a like white woman immigrant from Romania. I still am a Romanian citizen, but I live in the US, so it's not particularly interesting. But,
yeah,
it holds like, you know, a certain privilege. So I'm like, okay, I'll just shut up and be here, you know, and do my best to support other creators.
Yeah, there was a oh gosh, I'm gonna just mess up if I try to remember exactly what it was, but there was a discussion a few years ago that came out of a series called Difficult Conversations that was initiated by the British Council, and there was a central question that came out of it, which is who has the right to speak for whose wounds and why? And I always thought that was such a fascinating question. So I imagine that is something that you struggle with sometimes, about, you know, the right to speak to something else, you know, and yeah, I don't know if it is, but I think you just alluded to that. Yeah. Okay. All right.
Could I add to what Laura was saying, actually?
Please.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, like, it's really important when I'm making work to consider, like, is this a pleasurable activity? Like, am I actually enjoying what I'm doing? And sort of speaking to your question, Melanie, about like, is it important to like address whatever global issues? I think sometimes you end up inhabiting a body which happens to be a global issue.
Right.
You happen to be inhabiting a body that is contentious to someone or some power, whatever. And so, like, working just from life, from like my lived experience, like there's a lot of pleasure in that, which I hope translates like in the film. Like, I hope people enjoy like the sparkliness of it, the kind of pink coloring of it, and things like that. Just because that's as important, like, as whatever's being spoken to, like more politically speaking. That's all I wanted to add.
Thank you. It is a very beautiful piece and also very soothing. I just feel like I'm kind of floating when I look at it. So everybody, I hope that you have the opportunity to check it out. Anybody has any questions for anybody else still, again? I also like the idea, I like the conversation around collaboration because I feel as though a lot of artists I know work best in kind of collaborative spaces. And I'm wondering, do you sort of seek collaborations? Those of you who collaborate, I mean, Alicia, I know that you, for instance, you know, it's a specific kind of, I mean, obviously you're going to collaborate because of the nature of that work, but are the rest of you sort of looking for collaborations in your work?
Yeah, I think I'm constantly looking at the relationship between the people in my film and myself as a collaboration instead of anything other, really. I think it helps the flow and it brings a much greater overarching feeling of humanity to what's happening. Because the last thing I want anyone to feel is isolated when we're working together. And I also don't want to feel isolated. So the more a person's story, their talents, their abilities can inform the next step we need to take, especially in a filmmaking project, I think the better off I am and the better I feel about the work afterwards. And I think it comes through in the work as well.
I think for me, it's, I would say relatively new, probably because I'm a very own way person in that I get up at certain times, do what I want to do, when I want to do it, where I want to do it, and I just go with it. And that sort of bull in a china shop attitude to things doesn't necessarily go well with collaboration, but it's something that I feel I need to do for me. Whereas my work conversations that's ongoing is particularly a collaborative work in that I actually have to speak to the sitters and discuss things with the sitters. And these are people that I'm talking to on a regular basis so that they're not just the subject of the images that I'm shooting. They're actually part of the entire process because they first have to consent to be the sitter. But the only way they would end up being a sitter is if we've been talking about stuff and it may be actually physically in a space together speaking, or the way we've been doing it for the last 2 years, chats during DMs about things, or chatting via stories on Instagram and stuff like that. And that's the thing for me that's been changing my practice somewhat.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, for me, collaborations just become a lot more important more recently with work. I find like with filmmaking, the space that it allows me, like previously it was about like I needed to find a way to hold space for poetry, sound, image, performance, and all of these things. I'm starting to realize that it can actually hold a lot more than that in terms of other people's voices, bodies. And so more recently I've been working with friends, loved ones as well, like including their words and stories, and just like thinking about filmmaking or video making, like thinking about it in relation to the sea, which feels like very just this abundant space which can hold absolutely everything. And I'm just trying to like test the limits of that space with video making to see like how closely can we collaborate? What is the capacity for that kind of intimacy in the space of video?
I think that is, I'm at the 2-minute mark. So I think that that's actually a really beautiful place to wrap things up, you know, around this idea of how could we collaborate and how can we find those connections. And I'm really grateful to everybody on the panel. I'm so happy because I saw all of the works when I was curating the new media program. I didn't know that I would get the opportunity to actually have conversations with you. So Just thank you for your time and for your generosity in sharing your experiences as a filmmaker / artist. I forgot to ask how you identify. That's something I often ask some people, which is a fun question. But Tennille, I think I'm kicking it back over to you for the wrap-ups, and I hope you will let everybody know how to see these amazing works.
All right, thank you, Melanie and panelists, for the insightful discussion. Again, this panel was brought to you with the support of Shell Trinidad and Tobago Limited. You can find a full list of the films on our website, ttfilmfestival.com. For new media screenings in particular, they will be in person this Friday and Saturday at Grandison Lab in Belmont from 6 to 8 p.m. And they'll also be screening online from Friday to Tuesday, all free of charge. If you have any feedback for us, please be sure to share your experience with us via email, admin@filmco.org. If you do happen to post about us on social media, please tag us. We like to remain connected to our filmmakers. On behalf of the TTFF, we hope that you enjoyed this panel and hope to see you again at other events. Enjoy the rest of the festival, and thanks again, panelists and Melanie.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.